ESPN may have fired Ryan Clark and Cam Newton, but neither man stayed quiet for long. Ryan Clark's first message after being fired quickly went viral, while Cam Newton's next move had fans questioning whether ESPN made a huge mistake. So what did they do after losing their jobs? And why is the backlash against ESPN only getting louder? Let's break it down. Here's the moment that started it all. Monday, July 20th. Ryan Clark is sitting on the NFL Live set, doing what he's done for over a decade, breaking down football, sparring with his co-hosts, being himself on camera. And then mid-show, he's told he no longer has a job. After more than a decade of working as an analyst for ESPN, Ryan Clark was fired from the network on July 20, and he commented during the majority of NFL Live, but was not there for the final segment after reportedly finding out he had been let go from the network while the show was on air. Think about that for a second. He finished most of the show not knowing his career there was over, and then just didn't show up for the last segment. No goodbye, no send-off, just an empty chair where a person used to be. Why the rush? According to The Athletic's Andrew Marchand, Clark was informed he was being let go during a break on Monday's NFL Live. ESPN had originally planned to notify him the next morning, alongside other affected employees, but media inquiries forced the network to accelerate the timeline for fear that Clark would learn about it online first. So the network that employed him for years was more worried about a leak than about how he'd find out he no longer had a job. Now here's where it gets worse. The next day, Cam Newton, former NFL MVP, one of the most recognizable faces on First Take, got the same treatment. Cam Newton was out at ESPN just one day after the network fired longtime NFL analyst Ryan Clark while he was on air shooting NFL Live. Two names, two firings, 24 hours apart. That's not a coincidence. That's a purge. And it wasn't just those two. Newton was included in this latest wave of layoffs tied to ESPN's acquisition of NFL Network, which also included Karl Ravech, Tom Pelissero, Charles Davis, Bart Scott, David Lloyd, and Stefania Bell, among others. A legend of the broadcast booth, an NFL insider people trusted for years, a fantasy football expert millions of viewers relied on every Sunday, all shown the door in the same stretch of days. So how did the football world react? Loud and fast. Deion Sanders didn't wait a beat. The Colorado head coach, who spent plenty of time on set with both men, went off on social media in defense of Clark specifically. He called out the network directly, saying this was one of many reasons he loved his brother for life, and that Clark was arguably the best talent on the entire ESPN roster. "This is one of many reasons I love this brother to life," Sanders said about Clark. "This was arguably the best talent on the ESPN roster. How can you know WHO still be there and real Clark 25 AANT? Wow, and please tell me the rumors of Cameron Newton ain't true, and this dude is still there." Coach Prime wasn't guessing. He was naming names, questioning why lesser talents kept their jobs while two of the network's most recognizable football voices got cut. Then came Stephen A. Smith, Newton and Clark's own First Take partner, the guy who shared a desk with both of them every week during football season. Smith didn't hide his frustration either. He got on his own YouTube channel and let it out, saying Clark was arguably the best NFL analyst in the country and that losing him hurt more than people realized. Ryan Clark, a person that I consider to be arguably the best NFL analyst in America, is no longer a member of ESPN. I can't even tell y'all how much that hurts. "I'm not happy about this decision one bit," Smith ranted. He went further, making it clear the people calling the shots at the network knew exactly how he felt about it. "The bosses know I'm not happy about this decision. I've made that very, very clear." That's Stephen A. Smith, the face of ESPN's most watched debate show, publicly airing out his bosses on his own channel. That doesn't happen unless something genuinely broke inside that building. And it wasn't just the big names. Regular fans and media figures piled on too. Longtime NFL draft analyst Todd McShay ripped into how the whole thing was handled, calling the decision to fire Clark mid-broadcast either diabolical or incompetent. Analytics writer Warren Sharp pointed to a tense on-air moment from weeks earlier as part of what pushed the network toward this decision in the first place. Even people who admitted they weren't big fans of Clark's on-air style said the way it played out was rough to watch. So within one 72-hour window, you had a Hall of Fame caliber coach, the biggest name in sports debate TV, a veteran draft analyst, and an entire online fan base all reacting to the same gut punch. Two respected voices, gone almost overnight, with the manner of their exits somehow becoming just as big a story as the exits themselves. But to understand why this hit as hard as it did, you have to go back. Back to how Ryan Clark built over a decade at that network, and how Cam Newton, a former league MVP, ended up behind a debate desk in the first place. Because neither man walked into ESPN as a nobody, and neither one left quietly. Ryan Clark didn't stumble into television. He built it, brick by brick, the same way he built an NFL career out of nothing. Clark played in the NFL for 13 seasons before retiring in 2014, and he joined ESPN the following year. 13 years at safety, a Super Bowl ring, a Pro Bowl nod, and then straight into a broadcast booth without missing a step. Once he got there, he was everywhere. Right after leaving the NFL, he was picked up by ESPN, mainly as a football analyst for the league on its various programs. NFL Live, SportsCenter, Get Up, and First Take. That's not a guy doing one gig. That's a guy the network leaned on across nearly every football show it had. And the industry noticed. The former pro athlete even won Outstanding Personality, Studio Analyst at the Sports Emmy Awards in 2023. He wasn't just a panelist either. He co-launched an MMA podcast with Daniel Cormier back in 2021, expanding his footprint beyond football entirely. He soon gained a large enough profile that in 2021, he joined former UFC 2 division champion Daniel Cormier in launching an MMA-themed podcast named DC and RC. This was a guy who understood the media business wasn't just about showing up. It was about building a brand that outlasted any single show. So what happened? How does someone with that resume, that Emmy, that decade plus of loyalty, end up getting told he's done in the middle of a live broadcast? The cracks had been showing for months. According to reporting, Clark's standing inside the company had been shaky since as far back as the Super Bowl in February. Rumors that Clark could be in danger of losing his job have been rumbling since the Super Bowl in February per Marchand. That's not a sudden decision. That's a slow burn that finally caught fire. And then there was the incident that a lot of people point to as the real turning point, a heated on-air clash with his own colleague, Peter Schrager. During a segment breaking down a Week 1 matchup between the Eagles and Cowboys, the disagreement started over stats, over whether a player's individual numbers mattered more than his team's result. It didn't stay there. Schrager asked Clark not to belittle him, and instead, to allow him to voice other perspectives. Clark said in turn, "Peter, what I need for you to do is not get mad and let me finish." That exchange went viral within hours, and Clark knew it had crossed a line because he addressed it publicly not long after, posting an apology that admitted fault and named Schrager directly. The former Pittsburgh Steeler later posted an apology on X, writing, "Today I had an interaction with my colleague P.S. Rags, both on and off the air, that I regret. I have apologized to Peter and taken accountability with ESPN leadership. I value working with Peter and look forward to this season." But the damage was already circulating internally. Reports out of that period suggested the relationship between Clark and network executives had soured well before the actual pink slip arrived, and that the Schrager blowup became the tipping point leadership needed. Whether that one moment alone sealed his fate or simply gave the network cover for a decision it had already been circling, the timing lined up in a way that's hard to ignore. And then came the way it actually happened. Not a phone call after hours, not a meeting in someone's office, a live camera, an active broadcast, and a producer pulling him aside mid-segment. Sources told The Athletic that Clark, 46, was informed of his firing during Monday's NFL Live show, and the anchor subsequently did not finish the program. 1 minute he's on air breaking down football. The next he's gone, and the show just keeps rolling without him. What makes it sting more is what he was reportedly lined up to do next. This wasn't a guy on his way out the door in the network's long-term plans. Quite the opposite. The Athletic also reported that Clark was supposed to be a large part of ESPN's 2027 Super Bowl coverage before the decision was made to let him go, with the big game set to be broadcast on ESPN for the first time next year. Read that again. He was being penciled in for one of the biggest broadcasts in the network's history, and within months, he was cut loose entirely. His response when it came wasn't bitter, at least not on the surface. He posted a video of himself working out, framing the chaos of the day before as just another obstacle. Proof of life. Before the madness of yesterday, I woke up, got in my Tundra, drove to Planet Fitness, and got to work. Clark captioned the post. The rest of the day was eventful, but the journey continues. My peace is with God, and my humility comes from within. I'll continue to build myself so the world can never strip me of what's real. Composed, measured, but underneath it, the message was clear. He'd been blindsided, and he wasn't going to pretend otherwise. And then, in a moment that surprised a lot of people given what he'd just been through, he turned his attention outward instead of inward. As more names started dropping the following day, Clark posted well wishes for the other employees getting caught in the same wave, acknowledging how gutting it must feel for people who'd given years of their lives to that company, sending prayers and love to all those laid off today by ESPN. So many of you have poured your life into that company, and I know how you're feeling right now. He wrote. That's the Ryan Clark story. Over a decade built, an Emmy on the shelf, a Super Bowl assignment reportedly waiting for him, and then gone inside a single commercial break. But he wasn't alone in that boat, because less than 24 hours later, the network turned around and did something almost identical to a name even bigger than his. Cam Newton wasn't some guest analyst filling a seat. He was a former league MVP, a #1 overall pick, a guy who threw touchdowns in a Super Bowl before he ever sat behind a debate desk. And ESPN had been building him up, not phasing him out, right up until the moment they didn't. He joined the network as a rotating voice, appearing periodically alongside Stephen A. Smith. Newton began his ESPN career in October 2024 as a periodic guest on the First Take show with Stephen A. Smith. That's a modest start for a guy of his profile. Friday appearances during football season, nothing more. But the network clearly liked what it saw, because within a year, they doubled down. After a year, the former Carolina Panthers QB signed a multi-year extension to obtain a more solidified role on the show. That's not a network preparing to cut someone loose. That's a network betting on him. And the bet paid off, at least in terms of attention. Once Shannon Sharpe departed the show, Newton didn't just fill a seat. He got elevated into the most valuable real estate on the entire program. Last season, the network elevated Newton to replace Shannon Sharpe as Smith's primary Monday co-host during football season, the show's highest-rated day of the week. The highest-rated day, not a throwaway Tuesday slot, the marquee day, the one advertisers pay the most for. Newton wasn't just on the show, he was central to it. So then why is he gone? Less than 2 years after he was elevated into that chair. The official reasoning tied to a bigger event, one that had nothing to do with his performance, and everything to do with corporate math. According to Front Office Sports, Pitaro told employees that ESPN's recent integration of NFL Network and other NFL media assets drove most of the layoffs, after Disney completed the transaction earlier this year, giving the NFLA 10% ownership stake in ESPN as part of the agreement. In plain terms, ESPN bought NFL Network, absorbed a whole new roster of talent, and had to make room. Somebody was going to lose their seat at the table. But there's another thread running underneath that corporate explanation. A public, personal one involving the very man Newton sat next to every Monday. Back in the spring, Newton and Smith got into it. Publicly, Newton had brought controversial media figure Jason Whitlock onto his own podcast, a name Smith has openly said he can't stand. Newton and Smith engaged in a public back and forth last spring after Newton invited Jason Whitlock, whom Smith has said he hates with a passion, onto his podcast. It didn't stop at just having Whitlock on. Whitlock used the platform to go after claims from Smith's own memoir, and Newton didn't jump to defend his co-host. Smith criticized Newton for not defending him when Whitlock cited what he described as fabrications in Smith's 2023 memoir. Newton's response was simple. In his eyes, there was nothing worth correcting, so he didn't see the need to push back on Whitlock's claims. That answer didn't sit right with Smith, and the tension between the two spilled out across social media for weeks afterward. Now, nobody at the network has said outright that the Whitlock beef is why Newton lost his job, but the timing is impossible to ignore, and reporting has floated it as a factor swirling in the background. Newton's run on the show included a very public spat with Smith last spring, after Newton brought Jason Whitlock onto his own podcast, a beef that played out across social media for weeks, and Newton's decision to interview Whitlock and then double down may have contributed to ESPN's decision to fire him. So you've got two competing stories running at once. On one side, a corporate restructuring big enough to swallow up nearly a dozen names across two networks. On the other, a very public, very personal fracture between a host and his own primary debate partner. Maybe it's one. Maybe it's both feeding into the same decision. Whatever the mix, the outcome landed the same way it did for Clark. Sudden and stripped of ceremony. Multiple outlets confirmed it almost simultaneously, with sourcing describing it as settled well before any public statement came from the network itself. ESPN was parting ways with Cam Newton, multiple sources said, with the network including Newton in a round of layoffs that could be announced as soon as Tuesday. And just like that, Stephen A. Smith was suddenly without both of his primary sparring partners for the entire football season, all inside of 1 week. In any event, Smith will be without his two main analysts during the football season in Newton and Clark. Think about what that actually means for the show going forward. First Take built its entire identity around Smith butting heads with strong personalities across the table. Sharp was already gone. Now Newton and Clark gone too, in back-to-back days. The chair that used to rotate through some of the biggest names in football media suddenly needed two replacements at once. Heading into a season that was supposed to be a showcase year with the network's first ever Super Bowl broadcast on the horizon. That's the environment both men walked out of. A debate show gutted of its two most prominent black former players inside of 48 hours. A corporate merger used as the official explanation, and a very public feud sitting quietly in the background as an alternate theory. Nobody at the network wanted to confirm on the record. Zoom out for a second, because this wasn't just about two men. It was about a network reshaping its entire football operation, and the optics of that reshaping made things a whole lot worse. Start with the scale of it. This wasn't a quiet trim. It was a wave that hit almost every corner of ESPN's NFL coverage at once. The network parted ways with several high-profile personalities on Tuesday, including Ryan Clark, Cam Newton, Tom Pelissero, and longtime broadcaster Carl REVOLT, a trusted insider, a legendary anchor with decades on the network, two of the most recognized former players in sports media, all gone within the same 48-hour stretch. And here's the part that made fans furious. The network wasn't hurting for money when it did this. The moves came despite ESPN's strong financial performance and left many wondering why the company made such sweeping cuts. This wasn't a company on the brink, trimming to survive. This was a profitable business deciding it didn't need certain names anymore. Carl REVOLT, 33 years at the company, found out about his own firing not through a private conversation with an executive, but through social media, same as everybody else. Carl REVOLT discovered his own fate through social media. 33 years, and the news reached him the same way it reached a random fan scrolling on their phone. The chairman did eventually put out a memo trying to frame all of it. Jimmy Pitaro told staff the company had to make difficult calls as it folded the newly acquired NFL Network talent into its existing roster. In a memo obtained by Business Insider, ESPN chairman Jimmy Pitaro told staff on Tuesday that the company had to make some difficult decisions about job impacts as it folds NFL Network employees into its existing roster, writing that over the past several months, they'd made significant progress integrating the NFL assets acquired into ESPN. He also insisted the company wanted to handle it all with compassion and respect. Pitaro also said ESPN planned to treat affected employees with compassion and respect while helping them through the transition. Compassion and respect. Try telling that to a man who found out he was fired during a live broadcast because the company was scared he'd read about it online first. Then came the detail that turned frustration into outrage. Right as these names were getting cut, reports surfaced that the network was closing in on a new deal for one of its biggest current stars, a deal worth an amount that dwarfed almost every other contract on the roster. The timing of the layoffs became an even larger story because it coincided with negotiations surrounding Pat McAfee's next contract, with ESPN and McAfee reportedly working toward an extension believed to be worth between $60 million and $65 million annually, a figure that would roughly double the value of his current agreement. $60 to $65 million a year, handed out or at least negotiated in the same window that veteran voices were getting cut loose mid-broadcast. Fans didn't need it spelled out for them. One user summed up the math bluntly, pointing out that figure was roughly 3 times what the network reportedly pays its own signature face of First Take. Another put it even more bluntly, joking that the new contract essentially collected Clark's old salary the way a villain collects a trophy. And that resentment wasn't confined to a handful of angry tweets. It became the actual headline. Fans are blaming Stephen A. Smith, Pat McAfee after ESPN fired Ryan Clark during massive round of layoffs became a real story running across sports media. Even though, as most reporting made clear, neither Smith nor McAfee had any say in who got let go. Most of the criticism was aimed at ESPN's business decisions, not at Smith or McAfee themselves, since neither broadcaster had any role in deciding who would lose their job. But that distinction didn't stop the anger from spreading. It just meant the anger had nowhere specific to land except the network itself, and the optics of one massive payout landing in the same week as a mass layoff. The reported salary figures made everyone go crazy, and many fans felt it was hard to ignore the logic between the layoffs and the network's biggest contracts. Meanwhile, the online reaction to Clark specifically split down a very predictable line. Some fans dug up old flashback clips of Pat McAfee needling Clark years earlier over his on-air attitude toward non-star players, replaying it as some kind of vindication. Others focused entirely on the mechanics of the firing itself. How it happened, who knew beforehand, whether the rest of the panel had been tipped off while sitting right next to him on set. One clip circulated widely, showing the broadcast cutting to commercial, coming back, and Clark's seat simply empty, with viewers combing through the reactions of the remaining panelists frame by frame, insisting they could tell everyone else already knew. Whatever side of the debate anyone landed on, the reaction was enormous, and it wasn't going away quietly. This wasn't a story that lived and died in one news cycle. It kept generating headlines for days, new angles, new leaked details, new social posts. Because the combination of a beloved analyst's abrupt exit and a jaw-dropping contract number for someone else was simply too good a contrast for anyone to ignore. So where does that leave the two men actually at the center of it? Because while the internet argued about salaries and optics, Clark and Newton still had to figure out what came next. Here's the thing about both of these men. Neither one walked out of ESPN's building without options. Clark had already been building something outside the network for years. He co-hosts a podcast alongside Fred Taylor and Channing Crowder, one that's carved out its own lane in sports media independent of any single TV deal. Neither Clark nor Newton is without a platform. Clark co-hosts the Pivot podcast alongside Fred Taylor and Channing Crowder. That's not a fallback plan. He scrambled to put together after getting the news. That's infrastructure he'd already laid down, sitting there waiting for him the moment the ESPN chapter closed. Newton's situation looks similar. He walked away from a broadcast contract. Sure, but he's never been a guy short on ventures. Between 4th and 1 and Funky Friday, he's got 2 podcasts already pulling in serious audiences on their own. Newton, who earned over $133 million as an NFL star, isn't completely without work. The retired Signal Caller hosts 2 successful podcasts, 4th and 1 and Funky Friday. A guy who made that kind of money throwing footballs was never going to be searching the classifieds because one cable contract ended. Still, there's a difference between having options and knowing exactly which door to walk through next. As one report put it plainly, nobody quite knows yet what direction either man takes from here. It remains unclear what next steps the 3-time Pro Bowler will take in his career. What we do know is that neither man disappeared quietly, and neither one turned bitter in public, at least not in any way that torched bridges. Clark's message after the dust settled wasn't aimed at the network that just cut him loose. It was aimed at the other employees going through the exact same gut punch that same week, telling them he understood how they were feeling and that he hoped a closing door meant another one was about to open for them too. Newton, for his part, hasn't gone quiet either, given how vocal he's been across his career, whether firing back at critics on his own podcast or standing his ground in public disputes with fellow analysts. Nobody expects him to simply fade from the conversation. His voice has always carried further than a single show could contain it, and that's not likely to change now that the show itself is gone. And Stephen A. Smith is still sitting behind that same First Take desk, minus the 2 men who spent the better part of 2 years sparring with him there. He's already said publicly that network leadership knows exactly how unhappy he is about losing Clark. Whether that frustration turns into anything more, a public campaign to bring one of them back, a permanent shift in how the show operates, or just a lingering tension every time the topic comes up on air, is still playing out in real time. What's clear is this: 2 men who built entire second careers inside that building got shown the door within 24 hours of each other, in a manner that blindsided colleagues, drew public pushback from a college football head coach, provoked an emotional on-camera reaction from the network's biggest star, and became a bigger story than almost anything happening on the actual football field that week. Deion Sanders said what a lot of people were thinking when he questioned how certain names got to keep their seats, while two of the most talented voices in the building didn't. Stephen A. Smith said what a lot of insiders were thinking when he admitted on his own channel that this decision hurt in a way he couldn't fully put into words. Ryan Clark drove to the gym the morning after his world flipped, posted about it, and kept moving. Cam Newton went from the network's marquee Monday chair to a free agent in sports media inside a single news cycle. And a business that just posted strong numbers handed one of its remaining stars a deal reportedly worth tens of millions more per year. In the very same week, it let two of its most recognizable football voices go. That's the story. Not a rumor, not a single leaked tweet. Two firings, two reactions from two men who refused to disappear quietly, and a football media landscape that's still trying to figure out what it looks like without them in the room.